Well, hello, and welcome everybody. You are joining me on what I have no idea is the episode or what series we're in. I think we might be on episode 11, but if we're not, it'll say so on the outside of this podcast. So welcome anyway. So you have just arrived at Healing at Last, the podcast, and I am joined by the formidable Jeff Brown. Jeff, for anybody that has been living under a rock or is not aware of who he is, Jeff is the author of now 8 books. My personal favourite is Ground to Spirituality, which was profound for me and helped me understand so much about a world that I had occupied for such a long time. But this next book is also now my favourite, so I feel like I'm cheating a bit. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about his 8th book, Humanifestations. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy, and I have been lucky enough to write a bit of a blurb for this. And it truly is heartwarming, and it speaks to all aspects of our human life. I feel it speaks to the pain in us, it speaks to the hope in us, it speaks to the relationship, the need for love, it speaks to all of that in a really beautiful, grounded, heart-centered way. And it is one of those books that you can open up and return to, even just for a glimpse, even just for a sense of coming back and home to yourself. I have found myself opening it up, reading quotes and putting it back down and feeling connected to me and feeling connected to the world again. So it is one of those gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous books. So I could talk all day about it. Jeff and I could talk all day about it. But just before Andrew just or bring Jeff on, what I do want to say is that Jeff and I have had a kind of a friendship, Jeff. I don't know if it's friendship or it's mentorship. It started off as mentorship, to be honest, where I had Jeff tortured to support me in my work. And Jeff was one of the very first people that explained witness consciousness to me. I had no reference for my experience until he explained it to me. And from there on in, he has been a mentor, a guide, a friend, and he has been instrumental in pushing me forward and continuing the work that I do. I hope we never lose contact. I hope we never lose friendship. He is both a comedian and an author at the same time. And we've spent many an hour talking about God knows what, but I am the richer for it all. So I'm going to leave that on the table now, and we're going to talk to Jeff about this brilliant book that I know that when you see and you get this book into your hand, you'll be the richer for too, because you can't help be when you're in this man's company or reading this man's work. So welcome, Jeff. Welcome. I hope that was an all right introduction for you, was it?
Yeah, I just have to live up to it.
Yeah.
No, it was. It's been a delight to encourage your work. I sort of spotted you. I don't know how that happened. And you explained the clearing method to me in I think we did a video on my Enrealment Media channel, a dialogue. And what I loved about your work is that we're taking the witness observer consciousness, the watcher, let's say,
Yeah.
and you were utilizing it at a young age to not as a detachment practice, not in an effort to watch the mind in particular, but really to get in close to the wounds. And we all know, a surgeon has to see the wound before the surgeon can suture it. And it resonated for me because so much of the sort of spiritual community is utilizing the witness on some level or another. It's very subtle, as something that I would consider to be more of a self-avoidant intentionality. And I used the witness when I was a teenager to see my material, to name my parts, to really to understand my personal psychology. And what I love about the clearing method is that I feel like it bridges the healthier aspects of spirituality, which is this sort of emphasis on the witness, but it utilizes it in a way that comes in close to a healing process and it becomes a healing process. And I think, when I wrote Soul Shaping, just when I was started to create terms, one of the simple terms was Western consciousness, the the blend of the wisdom of the West and the East, and I think that that's what this is. The clearing method is you're activating the watcher, but you're activating the watcher with the healing intentionality. And I think that that really is the next step forward. I think what's happened is that we've have so many people in this thing that they call the spiritual world. I don't think what they're doing is spiritual actually, but that's what it's been called, with all of the sort of patriarchal and new cage constructs around it. And then we have this thing called Western psychology. And doesn't make any sense to me. You have a bunch of confused people. They're like going deep into their story and psychology. They're turning around and denying the existence or
Yes.
veracity of their story. They're dissolving the ego, allegedly, of course, not really in the so-called spiritual world, versus trying to develop a healthy ego and a healthy sense of self in the Western psychology model. So there's actually a quote in New Manifestations about that. And because I think everyone ends up so super fucked up, like you're either, super psychological or super spiritual. And so you end up being like a bird with one wing. And really, I think from my perspective, what the clearing method does is it the bird becomes intact again, um,
Yes.
and actually stops floating around in the so-called transcendent realms and actually becomes a human.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
so,
we don't have to be in one or the other. There is this room for the coming together.
well, it's more, there is room for it, but we can't be human if we don't bring all of this together. And I think the more human we are, our definitions of this thing called spirituality will humanize, and we'll stop looking for our answers up and out and start looking for them down and in. Um, and
And
that's
that's what I love about Human Manifestations. There's a quote, and I know we're going to talk a bit about that now. There's a quote there that calls for the bravery of stop looking out,
mm-hmm,
start looking in. There's that beautiful quote of,
mm-hmm,
um,
mm-hmm.
either you armor up or you turn towards yourself. Either way is brave. I don't know if you want to read that quote because
Yeah, sure.
it's so beautiful.
So I don't know if this is just an audio or are you doing video on these too?
No video as well, so it's perfect.
Okay, so I'll just show the cover because the book
Yes.
is when you as you'll have this will happen with your book, Healing at Last, that you get a book proof, and if you approve the proof before the book gets printed so that it's done properly. So I think the book is arriving early. I think I might get them tomorrow or something. But
Beautiful.
um,
Yeah.
so that's the cover and that's the back and all that. So let me read the quote. It is actually the first quote you're referencing in the book. There are two forms of courage in this world. One demands that we jump into action with our armor on. The other demands that we strip ourselves bare naked and surrender.
Yeah.
Bravery is a curious thing.
Yes. How
Yeah,
beautiful.
I like that. I mean, so yeah, let's talk about that quote. I mean, it means a lot of different things to me. It means understanding that the transformative journey is a art form. It's sort of a dance between willfulness and surrender. And the challenge is, and we learn this the hard way over time, is to know when is the right time to get willful and when is the right time to drop in and just surrender to your
Yeah.
experience, to your process, to your feelings, to your vulnerability. It has other meanings for me as well. It's sort of the dichotomy between a survivalist way of being, which is the one we're all most familiar with in this world, where we, basically define ourselves by what puts food on the table. So we armor ourselves emotionally, physically, energetically, in order just to get through the day and survive the world, versus, this more authentic way of being that many of us are seeking now in our lives, where we're not defining ourselves simply by what puts food on the table, although you always have to be able to do that, but we're defining ourselves primarily in relation to the deeper internal question of who we are and why we're here and what is the offering we're here to bring to the world. And so I think for me, I learned that this is so important that if you don't do this right, if you get willful when you need to surrender and you surrender when you need to get willful, you fuck the whole thing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's
And
interesting about that is whenever we understand that, whenever we understand how to meet those needs in ourselves, then we can become more authentic. Because during the healing journey, or on the healing journey, there are times when it's just not possible to be in the heart of the pain. When it's just not,
yeah,
when
it's
you have
dangerous when
armor,
it's
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 dangerous.
actually quite dangerous to do that.
Yes.
Right. So that's a great example of it. There are times when you have created space, can create space to be with the process,
Yeah.
inhabit the process, work
Yeah.
through the material. There are times when you have to say goodbye to those parts of yourselves to the extent that you can and say, look, I'll be back.
Yeah.
But I got to go out into the world. I got to consciously armor. So
Armor. Yeah.
you want to reach the stage where your armoring process becomes a conscious process.
Yeah.
You don't enjoy it, but you at least know you're coming back.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's a survivalist tool. You know that you have to armor up. You know that you have to do whatever it takes to be able to
sure.
survive this pain, and hopefully you'll be back to it. Because I think, yes, the clear method is what it is, and it's this invite, because that's all it is, an invite to the inner world, the pain that is within. But just because it's there doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do for everybody. We have to become aware of when it's right to turn in, when it's right to be with the pain within, and when the situation, our life situation
Mhm.
allows for us to do that. If we're
Yeah.
not putting food on the table, our energy is not going to be freed up. If we're not in some sort of safety, our energy is not going to be freed up to go with them. So we need to do what we need to do to get by. So it's not our yes, it's all about turning in, it's all about staying in the pain, it's all about, being in these vulnerable places. And it's also not all about being armored up for the rest, but it's the beautiful dance that is necessary
I mean,
between.
I think it's the dance of reality. I mean, I think that's what it is. And I think that people who move too far in the direction, and I did for a while because I was learning how to surrender, I was learning how to be vulnerable, I was learning how to sort of break down the armor, and went to a place of extreme sensitivity where it became very difficult to function in the world. And part of that was necessary to help me to understand what it was like to feel deeply again. But part of it was unhealthy because it took me farther away from the energetic necessity for armor at certain places and certain
Yeah.
stages in order to manage and survive the world and deal with crazy people in your life and all the things that require us or demand for us to be more capable of armoring up or energizing or at least healthily and sturdily boundarying ourselves so we can manage the world. So this is the dance, and
Yes.
you will learn it. You will learn this dance the hard way. It's not an easy. It's the hardest dance to learn. It's not the polka, um,
As it
but
is the hardest
it's
dance. I've heard myself say, and have heard myself say to other people, where there is great awareness, there can be too much awareness. And there is this dance
sure.
back and the either flow or dance back and the normality where you're not the watcher the entire time, where you're not in your process the entire time, where you're not facing the pain or the past the entire time, that at some level you're living, whether that's armored or not, but you're living in some version of normality.
Mhm.
That is the beauty of the dance. And I think when we look across, when we look out on the social media, and there's often these polarized views, it's all about the mindset, it's all about the spiritual side, it's all about the deep somatic work. The
It's
reality
not.
is
It's
so
not
much.
life. It's
No, it's
just
not
not
like.
life. It's not life. I mean, I think it's important to understand the nature of trauma as well. That whether it's small t or big T trauma, whatever we're talking about, that there is a way in which the excavation of the material which life forces or you consciously go for in your somatic or therapeutic practice, you can only stay there for so long before you need to pull out of it and integrate
Yeah,
whatever's just happened. So
so
I used to go down to Connecticut and work with Alexander Lowen, who was the creator or co-creator of bioenergetics. And I would take this sort of 10 or 11-hour train ride back from these
yeah,
really, I mean, I was working, he was a master, and then I would go up and work with his wife and do like an hour with this group of people that were doing hardcore. Like I could not keep up with these people there, this sort of bioenergetic exercise framework. And I needed more than the 10 or 11 hours, but I absolutely needed that time alone on the train just to reassemble my
Yes.
sense of who Jeff was
Yes.
and my lens on reality and my um, reconnection with some primal aspect of myself that had to get put away to survive the world. So I think it's important, and I also wrote that quote, and so it was in relation to my journey before and including soul shaping, where I felt as though in order for me to explore my sacred purpose, identify why I was here in this lifetime, sometimes I needed to go out into the world and try stuff on for size. I needed to get out there and, go to law school, become a lawyer, and see how that felt for me. And at other times, I needed to just surrender and lie on the couch, feel into myself, befriend my confusion
Wow.
in order to clarify and sort out. And they were both very courageous paths. Going out into the world and trying to slay the monsters is a hard path, and going inside and trying to slay the monsters is a hard
It's hard.
path.
It's hard. Yeah.
They're brave paths, and I think anybody who's even listening to this conversation and engaging in this kind of an inquiry, um, really needs to understand that they're a pioneer, probably in their family lineage, and it's remarkable that we're even entertaining this question after centuries of survivalism. Um,
I know.
and I think we should also, as a result of that, be realistic about how far we can go, thinking about the sociology of where we're coming from. It's not to say we shouldn't go for everything, but if all you can do in your lifetime is recognize and understand your wounds and their sort of ancestral or generational lineage and make a little progress in relation to them not being quite as controlling your
Yeah,
day-to-day
dominant.
life,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, then I
Yeah.
think you are an extraordinary achiever in a world that really misunderstands what true achievement is.
But I think in this conversation, what we're saying is there's room for it all. And there's also room for part healing. It doesn't have to be these huge
Hmm. Hmm.
transformational moments or stories. I think that's what you're saying. That's so beautiful and grounded and human and real. And it doesn't have these big expectations, because often when we're in this healing journey, then the expectation is complete transformation, complete ending of the transgenerational lineage that has come your way, the being in, if you've found your soul's purpose, then you're, New York Times bestseller, that's what the level that you've reached, that there is some level of realism in this, and a sense of okayness
Hmm.
at whatever level you find in you. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
and I think it's really like I've known a number of, let's say, famous people in
Mm.
the political and non-political worlds, and sometimes they have a great talent, they have a great skill set, there's a reason they're there, it's like a meritocracy.
Yeah,
But a lot of times it's not true
yeah.
that they have some great talent, and they're really egoically overcompensatory. They're really motivated by the desperate need to get validated, get attention, be seen as something that they're usually not. And even if they achieve that, they're still, without realizing it, trapped inside of a survivalist
Yeah.
construct where the sense of self is defined primarily through external validation. They're as famous as they are at the very beginnings of the transformative journey, because my experience is that the people who take the deeper level of the transformative journey, it's a very private thing, and you may end up becoming well known because you've developed some skill sets in the heart of that and you have an offering to bring and you're called to that. But that's you're not you never do it because you're looking for love in all
Yeah.
the wrong places. You're doing it because it's just organically flows from the person that you're becoming. And
And there's a quote in the book. I know that's not one that we've pulled out. There's a quote in Human Manifestations about that. It's about the celebrity culture, and
oh yeah.
it's a,
Hmm.
it's a beautiful quote. You might want to read that. But I think that I think that the woundedness in us creates patterns, creates personalities, creates puppeteers our way of being to the extent that we're unconsciously aware of it. And sometimes, and I know from myself, there was lots of questions for me. I had to ask myself, am I doing this for me? Am I doing this to meet any woundedness in me? And at the beginning, it's to what extent is the wound healed? To what
Mhm.
extent have you been in the heart of that wound? What extent have you been in the heart of that and the understanding of that wound and how it's puppeteered you? And I had to ask myself real questions about the method, real questions about its delivery. I mean, you've had many conversations where I have said, this is over, I don't want to do this anymore. And then there's this authentic calling that's not of the wound, that's not of the
Yeah,
survival of the wound. It's
right.
the authentic calling that says, kind of like you've no choice, that this really isn't about you.
Mhm,
This
mhm,
method isn't about you. It's about helping other people, not in a kind of you know, not serving yourself way. But that was really clear to me that this, and I had to come home to that in myself. Is this meeting my wounded needs in any way, or is
mhm,
this something different?
mhm,
And that's what you talk about in this quote, when it is actually meeting the wounded parts of people, when they're needing
mhm.
celebrityism, or there's, I think you call it celebrity, is it? I want to read the quote.
There's a few of them, so let me read one of them.
Yeah.
Celebrity culture is a huge reason why humanity is locked into a self-diminishing reality. It must be dismantled. Until it is, much of humanity will be living vicariously through a small number of optics manipulated symbologies, looking up to people they don't even know, making voting decisions based on what their favorite star instructs. That's my favorite. Wasting precious time that could be spent actualizing their own sacred purpose. With our necks craned to look up to a bunch of fame seekers, we cannot look down at ourselves to notice the wonder that we are. I appreciate, let's have to be political here. I appreciate that some celebrities actually have a real talent for something, which they do, some, but so do all of us, if only
Yeah.
we can manifest it. And just because someone has a talent doesn't mean they know a thing about anyone else, nor does it qualify them to take on a bigger role in your life than you do. We are all luminous stars at heart, and it's been my experience that those who actualize their greatness want nothing to do with public stardom. They are too busy bringing their gifts into form. So I actually don't think that's the quote. I think I know the quote. I'm going to find the quote.
That's okay,
But
but that's all right.
but what I wanted to say about build upon what you said is that I feel as though when I am able to stumble onto my calling to write in a pretty clear and crisp way, I like that it helps other people.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that's what's motivating me. I believe that what's motivating me is quite personal, but not selfish. I had this terrible quote once that people actually liked. It was, "It's not selfish to love the self; it's self-kiss." It's a terrible quote,
That is terrible.
but I know. But people liked it, which is weird. Which actually is worries me. But in any event, I felt this. What I was talking about was that. So if I bring something through me,
Yes.
I'm never thinking about what it's going to do for other people. I'm doing it because my calling is me. I need to express myself in this
Yes.
particular form. This is fundamental to my particular sacred purpose. And that it benefits others is fine, but really, I'm doing it for me. Because if I don't do it, I feel like I'm living for me an incomplete life. But I want to find the,
Because just you go find the quote, and I'll add to that.
yeah,
Because there is a two-part process to it, isn't there? That when you're in the heart of whatever's moving through you, when you're in contact with it, for you it's writing, for me it's developing a method, then you're enlivened by it. You're encouraged by it. The life energy, the life force, the sense of contentment, the sense of awe, the sense of wonder that works through you in that way is life-giving. So you're really sourced by that is within you. Equally, it's really important that is for me, and in terms of the method, does help other people. But in the process of bringing this method to bear, I am enlivened by it. And every time I try to turn away from it,
Mhm.
which, as you know, I've tried to turn away from it multiple times and go and have, I don't know, one of those business mentoring jobs where you earn loads of money and end up uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
in Mauritius. Every time I've tried to do that, I've ended up coming back to this soul's purpose that's moving through me that I'm alive and by. And you can't unhook from it. You can't get away from it. It just becomes the thing that moves you forward. So
Yeah,
that's,
well, that's just fundamental to who you are in this world. So, sorry, Mauritius. So, what do I do? I just
yeah.
mentor corporate goofballs, and I can go live
Yes.
in
Yeah, you
Mauritius.
want to come to Mauritius with me?
I want to go to Mauritius bad, and I can't imagine. Oh, Mauritius is delicious. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's clear.
You promised to come to Ireland before you're going to Mauritius. We have to
I'm
get you
not sure. Now I'm not sure. Now I'm not
no,
sure.
no, be careful.
I don't know. So I'm going
Oh,
to read the quote. This is the quote
yeah,
you're talking about.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It actually, I heard from a few famous people after I wrote this. They were not pleased with me.
Okay.
I have known many famous people. Few of them understood the secret of life. This is my only secret of life piece ever. Most were so trapped inside of their childhood need for attention that they never graduated to the
Oh,
next stage. That stage is very profound and very private. It's the stage where the little voice that knows calls to you, lovingly reminding you of your one true path. Not the path that demands the most attention, but the path that threads right through the heart of your soul. There's a path in there with your name on it, and it longs to be lived. And when you live it, you no longer need to chase the world. You no longer crave applause, because home is where the soul is. One soul clapping is more than enough.
oh, do you see what I mean?
It's actually one of my favorite pieces.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I know who, I won't mention names, but I know who I was thinking about when I wrote that piece, and they've actually produced a lot of good writing for me, these characters.
Please don't mention them. Okay. There's something that you said there, and you said the path, the threads. I think you said the threads, the heart of threads to the heart of your soul. Oh my God. Yes.
There's a path in there with your, yeah, the path that threads right through the heart of your soul. Well, see, I believe in, so this is my admitted bias. I believe in coded path. I believe in what James Hillman, the great writer, called the innate image. I believe that we come in with an entelechy or an intellectia,
And an
an
essence,
in,
essence
an
of
inherent, yeah, and it has an inherent sort of directionality. It doesn't have to be specifically something. It can be, you know, archetypal. It can be a movement in the direction of surrender and bringing something to the world that emanates from that archetype, and whatever it happens to be. So I had a very clear path. It was like, you're going to do law, and you're going to work with Eddie Greenspan, you're going to go do humanistic psych degree, and then you're going to go and write books. So I had a very clear sense of where I was going, or where I had to go to feel gratified. Most of us don't, because culturally we have just too much, and emotionally and energetically, in the way to clarify that. And that's why the sacred purpose work that I do is intended to help people to excavate what already lives within them. And you do need to go out in the world and have experiences and get sort of internal feedback from those experiences as to whether you're on the right path or on the wrong path. Truth aches, or wrong path. Truth chills, right path. And so that's been my primary work, to make these very sometimes subtle and complicated distinctions between, an identification of self that is not true to path, and one that is true to path. And one of the tricks and confusing things that happen in the so-called spiritual world is they're also working against the idea of self-identification, but they're not honoring self-identification by
yes.
distinguishing wrong path from right path. They're saying there is no real self. And
And
so
they're
they're leading particularly trauma survivors to their deaths, because if there's no self to come home to when their stuff emerges in the middle of the night, they're doomed sometimes. So
yeah,
that's
because
why those are dangerous teachings.
Yeah, because to move the self away is to move the essence or the entelechy, or it's to entirely move
Your
that.
whole story, everything.
Everything moves away.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because when you talk about the soul's path, when you talk about, the threads of your original self, the threads of your essence, whatever words we give to that, and there's multiple
Yeah.
words for that,
Yeah. Mhm.
that is so heavily buried under the weight of the woundedness that we hold. And
Mhm.
then there's an entire world out there that tell us that woundedness mustn't be looked at, that woundedness can be covered up, that woundedness is not important, that woundedness must not be worked with. See past it, see beyond it. The thoughts that arise from that woundedness, allow them to float by like clouds. I
Mhm.
mean, my Lord, as
Mhm.
if they don't understand that those thoughts come with heavy embodied somatic material that bring you to your knees and allow nothing to pass by. I mean, it drives me crazy.
Mhm.
But in that, if we go back to that woundedness that blocks that soul's path, and then this narrative that says, you've nothing to see here, there's no story in that woundedness. That woundedness arose from your egoic self. Then how do you ever find that is with, the soul's
Well, you
part?
don't. Well, you don't. Well, you
No.
don't. I mean, so they're willing to grant you access to the idea that there's this thing called the very generic thing called the absolute self or the
Mm,
absolute soul,
mm,
but never the localized soul. And this is, I finally included my definition of patriarchal spirituality in this book at the back because I felt it was important to really language all of the sort of characteristics of these self-avoidant, Eckhart Tollean versions of spirituality, self-avoidance masquerading as enlightenment or awakening. I call it a sleepening, because it's to me, it's we can understand why people who've been super traumatized would like nothing more than to depersonalize, dissolve the notion of self and story, and look for their answers somewhere else. Unfortunately, and it can be very helpful for a period of time to keep you alive. The spiritual bypass can be a useful technique, of course, but if you do it for too long, eventually there's nothing really left of you, and they'll tell you it's wonderful. There's nothing left of you, and it actually works against them because if there's nothing left of you, you can't function in the world and make enough money to pay for the meetings with the sangha. So they have to be a little careful that they can't take you too far away.
yeah.
For me, I think with the key to the whole thing for me is sacred purpose. So this is the sort of the other piece is that we've been sold this sort of Americana version and Canadiana version of, sacred purpose is this great, amazing, noisy thing, Oprah Winfrey-esque thing you're going to do in the world. And it could be, but for most people it isn't. And I'm not so sure even Oprah Winfrey's necessarily on the right path for all we know. I don't know her soul's true journey, and I don't know if she's walking it. That's the story we're told.
Yeah.
But I think that the thing that's important to remember is that for me, wherever there's growth, there's sacred purpose. So if for most of us at this stage of human development, doing the emotional work is our deepest and truest and most meaningful purpose. It's the
Yes.
thing that's moving the collective needle. It's the thing that's helping to heal the ancestry. It's the thing that's taking us to the next level of understanding what an authentic human experience is rather than an adapted, defended, disguised survivalist consciousness is. And
And it
we
also is the
we
place in which where we can turn in and heal those pieces of ourselves so that we
we can
create,
become a more integrated
yes,
being. Yeah, I mean, so
and allow that
basically,
energy to come forward. Yeah.
absolutely, and then it does in the form of an offering, and that often happens. I mean, I think I mean, you only know the experience of the self that you've had to this point. So you have to believe somebody when they say to you, if you're super traumatized, that you're probably on some level somatically, psycho, emotionally, and energetically are experiencing reality in a fragmented state or in a
Yes.
fragmented form. You've had to parcel off different things in order to continue to walk forward because it would have been too painful to bring them into your moment to moment experience. But there is something to be said where possible and realistically over time with patience and persistence to do the work to bring the stuff to clear the debris. And the reason you do this is not because you enjoy feeling pain. Um, you do this because you're hungering or hankering for an experience of yourself as a more integrated being going forward. And often in the heart of that integrating process of parts, aspects, and woundedness, you do somehow find the thing you're here to bring to the world.
Absolutely.
I mean,
And,
really here to
and
bring, not just practically here to bring, but that you feel you must bring to the world, right?
and also that you're bringing it from a place of of wholeness. You're not bringing it from a place of woundedness. It's not masquerading as an offering that's actually hooked into the woundedness and trying to cover that, or you're actually
Right.
bringing it from a place of
That's right.
wholeness of self. Now,
Right.
does that mean that does the wholeness of self mean that you don't feel pain, that you've got rid of all your woundedness, that you've got rid of all your core issues? Absolutely not. This isn't a perfectionist journey. This
Mhm.
isn't this isn't a no pain journey. This isn't a no, and this is an emotional, somatic, embodied journey where you're available for all of it, every piece of it, and every piece that you clean and clear in method, every piece that you clear allows for more room for more of the real essence to show itself. And it's probably a very privileged conversation, because a lot of people out there can't even get near the woundedness for all sorts of reasons, for
Mhm.
economic reasons, for because, and a quote, well, maybe we'll end with this quote, because I know me and you could talk like this for hours and hours, but I'm trying to bring it back to the people that are listening to us, right?
Mhm.
Is there is an under there is a world of people out there that are trying so hard to turn on, to try and not listen to the noise of, the spiritual, patriarchy who are telling us there's nothing to see, or the mindsets, or the pathologists who are telling us this is all illness, or that there's a world of people out there that are trying so hard to be within the pain so that they can, so that they can be closer to who they really are, their essence, their sense of self.
Mhm.
But the reality of that is that they have to be in the body of the work,
Mhm.
their own literal body. And you have a beautiful quote, because a lot of us are either connected to our heads, or connected to the pathology, or and don't know how to access the pain that sits at the heart and covers their real self.
Mhm.
There's many words for that. That covers their essence, that covers their soul's purpose, that covers their soul path. And if you'd read that quote, it's not in your head. I think it starts with.
Yeah. So let me just say, in terms of before I read it, that I think what we're saying, and certainly what I believe to be true, is I use the term enrealment, but it's just sort of a kitschy term, and what it means is presence as a whole being experience. So not presence as a master meditator, but everything else in your life is a shit show, but presence as a, so almost like being a jack of all trades, master of none is a more evolved state than mastering one thing and being completely incompetent in every other part of your life. Because I fundamentally believe that's to be true. I believe that the purpose of the work is, of course, not to avoid pain. It's not to avoid all of that. It's to reach a place where you can, again, as you could have in the beginning before the stuff happened, hold the space for all aspects of reality. You can tolerate reality without it being so much and too much and unbearable. And the reason why parts of it are unbearable is because of the triggering, and the triggering is emanating from all that intense unresolved woundedness. If you can work some of those pieces through, doesn't mean everything goes away and you're never triggered, but the edges of it can soften over time, and you can be present with reality as you were intended to be. And from that place, it's a whole lot easier to find your path in this world, I believe. So I'll just read that quote
Yeah.
from page 32 of Humanifestations. It's not all in your head, it's all in your heart. It's all in your feet. It's all in your hips. It's all in your shoulders. It's all in your breath. It's all in your body. Anything unattended to, unresolved, unhealed, and unprocessed lives in your tissues, your cells, your musculature. It may be manifest in your thinking, but it doesn't begin there. The mind does not source itself, the body does. The trick is to not try to shift your thinking from within the mind itself. You can't. You may be able to subdue it there, but you won't be able to resolve it, because the troubling thoughts are merely a symptom of the deeper issues. They're a reflection of our emotional holdings and constricted musculature. They emanate from the fleshy trauma tunnels that we dug in order to survive this world. Many of us sit in the waiting room of awakening for decades, waiting impatiently for our new birth. Yet it never arrives because we're looking for it where it isn't, within the mind itself. Babies aren't born that way. You have to go down into the depths of the body to bring a new birth to life. Down, down, down into the alchemical chambers of new thought, your magnificent body. This is where you were born again. Close quote. And that was partly written, I mean, for obvious reasons, it's part of my kind of whole thing, but the whole terminology of monkey mind or beginner's mind. And then I started to call it monkey heart or beginner's heart because my experience was, it wasn't that I didn't want to calm down the chatter in my mind. It was that the patriarchal spiritual structure seemed to be about witnessing the mind from within the mind, spending 8 or 10 or 12 hours meditating inside of the mind, watching the mind in the hopes that that would calm down the mind. And I don't believe it works. It works for a little while, but then they go back out in the world and re-engage with the world, and they're crazy again. So I was like, okay, this isn't working. But then when I would go into my body and cry or rage or tantrum or clear my emotional debris, my mind would calm down. So
Yes.
it seemed very obvious to me in my bioenergetic work and my work as a child when I would clear my thinking by raging and tantruming on the backyard lawn of my crazy family home, that really we had it backwards. And I understand why the patriarchal spiritual structure has it backwards. They don't want to deal with their feelings. They don't want to deal with their ego issues. They don't want to deal with their memories. They want to pretend they're masters of the realm. This is the unhealthy ego of the masculine. So they want to just stay up there and dance up there and play up there and calm the thing down. But the way they calm it down, as we found with Michael in my book, who I dialogued with in Grounded Spirituality, is by becoming sort of obsessive head trippers or obsessive meditators, so they can fool themselves into thinking that they're no longer a mess.
Yes.
And then they go back and listen, I know many things about many of the famous people in the so-called spiritual guru world, and I can assure you they're not telling you the whole story about what really goes on in their lives when they get off the meditation cushion.
Yeah, because
And
that's
it's
the
because they're not
reality.
healing.
That
They're not
there,
healing.
yes.
They're
And they're
not healing.
not in the body, their
No,
actual bodies
no,
are
they're
not near the
antibody.
material. Antibody.
They're antibodies.
There's your next quote. But I guess for people listening to this, it's going to be incredibly liberating because these are the people that they look at as examples of how to love. These people who have it all sorted, who seem enlightened, who seem to be in the oneness of the world, who have no material left, who don't have any,
Good luck. It's a good
good
job.
luck with
It's
that.
good work if you can get it. Yeah, you might end
Yeah.
up in Mauritius
Can you
on a
find that?
beach.
Could you give that to me? And
Absolutely.
that's one thing about the Clear method that I wanted to, the Clear method offers how to access the pain within. It doesn't tell you what the pain is. How would I know? I have no idea what anybody else's
Right.
pain is.
Right.
But it allows a process where people can safely safely work within the body of the material that is within their own bodies, and release it and become free of it. Does that mean that it's it's a continuous process? We are aware of the material that is within and we can turn to it, but we can also turn into real life and be in the realness of this world. We can also armor when we need to armor. We can also be in connection to the soul's purpose that moves through us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the entirety of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
The clearing method allows for. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
take you back to some level of enlightened being that feels nothing or does nothing. It creates a more embodied human version of who we are, which is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of people that are listening to this, they're just starting that process, and they may have been caught up in spiritual
Monkey business.
keeping them, or they may have been caught up in the pathology of the pain within. Either way, it's the same gig, different labels, but it's the same gig. And what we're saying here in our conversations, and if they read the book, there are beautiful quotes that invite, and beautiful quotes that invite them into their body. And if they read the book, there's beautiful quotes that allow them to rest. And none of it is right or wrong, or it's just all part of the human experience. And I think
Yeah,
that we're talking about here, isn't it? The totality of the human experience and the okayness
yeah.
of that.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think that what we're also doing, I think underlying all of this, and I think we both share this particular view, is the belief that the human story,
Mm,
even if it's riddled with, and overlaid with trauma and unresolved material, and if somebody's seen nothing but suffering, but still somewhere below that or somewhere ahead of you, the human story, the uniqueness of the human story, and everybody's particular reasons for being here are worth fighting for your right to the light of your story. That this Byron Katie-esque turn around the story game, which is can be very tricky. It's of course sometimes it's helpful to look at your story in a different light. But if the goal of that is to ultimately take you to the place where your story isn't real and the self isn't real, we're back into this self-avoidant spirituality. And our view, and I think you would agree with me, is that detachment is a tool, it's not a life. So I think what we're inviting people in the direction of slowly but surely, at a pace that's realistic based on their history, their context, and their circumstances, is to reach a place where they can love and honor their story. Um, and of course, they're scripting their story as they go, but rather than throwing the whole story, the whole holy story out with the bathwater, and coming to the place where they realize that they don't have to get away from the self and the story to find their way, that it won't work, but that there's something to be said for working through the self and the story to reach the place where you find the gold nuggets that live really, I think, intrinsically at the heart of your soul's journey.
absolutely. And what's really important about the story is the source of the pain. And without the story, then there is no source. And then if there is no source, there's no way to clear that
Well, then
source.
there's nothing. Well, then there's
And
nothing,
then
right?
there's no agency, and there's no sovereignty, and there's no
Yeah,
trust. So
that's
the
right.
story is at the heart, you know, will the story is at the heart of the experience in which the woundedness has arrived. And it's
Mhm.
from that place that we can begin to heal, not the removal of the story or the removal of the pain from the story. That's just moving it aside. It's actually the bringing it to us and the working through it and the working in it and the believing of it and the sourcing of it that sets us free. It's not the opposite. It's not
Absolutely.
the removal of it. And from that place, we are exactly, sometimes, when we talk, I think, God Almighty, if we, you obviously you have much better way of saying it than I do. But I completely understand when you talk about this soul's purpose that is within us. And if we can get closer to our humanity, we are closer to that soul's purpose, fundamentally.
Well, I think that I make no distinction between our spirituality and our humanness. So
Yes.
that's why I don't buy any version of spirituality that diminishes the veracity or the significance of our humanness. And if it's helpful to somebody who's sort of bridging something called spirituality with something called psychology, one of the terms that I developed in soul shaping was selling your soul, CELL, your soul. And the sentence that I think reflects that best from that book is repressed emotions are unactualized spiritual lessons. So if it helps you to think of it this way, it's fine. You're doing this work. You're excavating the material. You're bringing it to the surface. You're clearing the debris. Because somewhere at the end of it, you transform into something more spiritually mature, and you've made sense of things that you've never been able to consciously make sense of, and you then move in the direction of defining conscious, because the self-avoidant ones always call themselves conscious, and the version of conscious they're talking about is the self-avoidant version of conscious. We're talking about a version of conscious human that's actually far more um, connected to the self on every single level. And rather than, again, perfecting singular threads of consciousness, I went to Harbin Hot Springs. I used to hang out with them. They were naked, they were perfect, they were pure, and they were above the human fray. And I would try it, but I was such a like clumsy Jew. Like I would, and a clumsy Irishman too. So I would sort of try to be this sort of pure, perfect golden boy. But then, and the thing is, I think I love the world of feeling. See, this is
Yeah.
the thing. From the very beginning, I love feeling. I was like, if I'm not feeling good, what the fuck's the point of all of
What's the
this?
point?
And right, so most of these models and the head tripping nature of the culture is feeling is completely irrelevant. It's all about some sort of oddly unhealthily versus healthily egoic notion of achievement or whatever. But what does it mean if you don't, and that if you have to keep shopping, if you never ever go to the shopping mall temple and it's never over, or you never reach a place of true peace with path inside of yourself, then what does it mean? It means nothing. To me, the purpose of this is so that I feel more complete and I can feel more and I
Intense.
can tolerate more of reality
Yeah.
moment to moment, what I call enrealment. And that's why coming back into the psychotherapeutic process in the body is essential, because we feel the nature of our experience through the feeling of the body itself.
It is the
And
gateway. It is the gateway to
yeah.
it is the gateway to the authentic self. It is the gateway to the soul's purpose. It is the gateway. And it's not, and it's through that gateway we become more alive and more real, more embodied, more grounded, more human.
Well, more here, right?
More
I mean, I think we're talking about presence. I mean, it's like the self-avoidant ones talk about presence, like Eckhart talks about presence, but then you hear him talk and he feels like sort of like a sleepy robot or something. It's like, for me, presence is an enlivened experience. It doesn't mean it's always ecstatic. It's certainly not manic, but it's vital. It's alive. Presence as a whole being, feeling-based experience of the moment. That's a very different version of presence than the self-avoidant, very super detached, dissociated versions that are being sold out there. And there's nothing wrong with what they're selling if they would just call it
what it
um,
is. Yes.
detachment practices that will give you perspective and that will
Yeah.
give you a relief and give your nervous system a break to get away from this difficult human life. No problem. It's when they start calling it enlightenment that we got a fucking problem.
Yeah.
Okay? Because that's misrepresentative of
Yes.
reality. That's not what they're doing. And my experience is that when you engage presence as a whole being experience, because I always found directionality in relation to my purpose in my body, eventually what happens is presence and purpose become indistinguishable from each other.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And that's a very different model, and your model is part of that model. This is all very different than notions of presence and purpose that we've been sold by the culture itself.
Yeah, or notions of happiness that we've been sold by the mindset gurus, or notions of success that we've been sold that is not actually connected to self. They're all just the same gig as the spiritual gig, which is avoid self at all costs and have this,
And call yourself self-realized.
yes, and this constructive self that you
That's
offer the
hysterical.
world.
It's
Yeah.
hysterical. It's
But what's
hysterical.
very difficult for people looking back or looking onward is that I have to be like that, either in the spiritual side of it or the mindset. I have to be successful. I have to be this version. And there is no enrealment of self in that. And that's actually more wounding than actually being with the wounds, clearing the wounds, and then discovering who you're born to be,
Right.
what your intelligence is, what that essence of yourself is, because that resides within you. So I'm hoping that when people are listening to this, they're like, can let go of the shackles of having to be enlightened, let go of the shackles of having to be super successful, because that makes you better. It makes you, so, and be closer to their humanness. This is the invite. This is what your book, Humanifestation, is,
Sure.
isn't
Right.
it?
Right. I mean, if we bring it down to this notion of success, it's defining success as a whole being experience, which includes your capacity for feeling, your capacity for thinking, your capacity for groundedness, and your finding of your purpose, however humble it may be, as long as it's truly connected to your individuated experience.
Beautiful.
somewhere deep within yourself. I mean, I know a great many very wealthy people who are tortured souls. Um, they learned how to master the economic realms. They learned some game, whatever it was, and but that has nothing to do with being one soul clapping. When you reach the stage where you don't need validation, where you in fact get a little annoyed by it sometimes because it's keeping you from your work, then you know you have probably found true success.
And there we'll end. But the book is all of that. It encompasses the human experience and allows for it and encourages it and claps the spirit, claps the essence on and calls for it to be more unreeled and calls for it to come home to itself and calls for the relationships to be more unreeled and enlivened. And it allows for us as human beings to let go of all of the pretense, all of the ways of being that we have been imposed upon that is supposedly right or supposedly better. And I think
Mm,
that's what
mm.
human manifestations does. Is that fair, Jeff? Is that what how you
Yeah, well, I mean it. I mean, I suppose I was aspiring to something like that. I mean, it comes down to this question for me. It's like lately I've been thinking about it. It's like, who are we fooling? You know, it's like you aspire for something that has to do with external validation. You devote your whole life to getting daddy or mommy or some substitute projected version of that, your neighbor or somebody at school or somebody or the whole world to think you're amazing. What people don't realize is people don't really give a shit about what the other. They'll like seriously, they'll spend 12 seconds thinking about your great achievement, and they'll go back to eating their lunch. It's like you're devoting your whole life to getting something from somebody that doesn't really give a shit. So why not devote everything
to
to
your
gratifying the
yourself?
soul that resides within you? And you'll find then you won't need the world to applaud you. Maybe you'll like it if they do, maybe you won't like it, but it won't have the same meaning because you'll be living inside of a pretty healthily self-satisfied experience of
Yeah,
who you are. So
beautiful. And the
so
book,
that's humanifestations.
that's
That's my
humanity.
vision. Yeah, because you could define humanifestations or manifestations as anything. So that's my particular idea of what I think would be good for us. To manifest because I think if everybody on the planet was able to do that work, and I understand there are many barriers,
Yes.
then I think we'd be living in a completely different,
Imagine.
actualizing, growthful, safe, kind, loving, sturdy world that's remarkably different from the one that the power brokers have contained, controlled forever and ever, and kept us from our own true
And
sovereignty.
that's a
So
whole other podcast. So
that
we'll
is,
talk about
and we'll
that's
get
a
there. We'll get
whole
there.
other word. We'll get there. But so what I would say to anybody listening to this, human manifestations is going to be at your bedside. And it's going to be that piece that you go back to, and then not because we're friends, not because you've supported me, but I genuinely connected to this book, genuinely connected to the heart, the meaning that it's its heart, and it's certainly something that a message that I've been trying to relay from my work. So there's a meeting of minds in that. So when's it out, Jeff? It's out very soon, isn't it? It's for pre-order now.
Yeah, I think it's up on Amazon.com for pre-order, in realment.com, but I think it's a bit too expensive to ship across to Ireland to the UK from Canada, but those are signed copies. And then it should be up on Amazon.uk. I think if they just go on and keep searching it, Amazon picks up and gets there.
Well, we have all the links for it, so the links will be below in the podcast details, and also
Great,
if anybody's on our newsletter, you'll get that newsletter probably tomorrow with the links for the book. So keep your eye on
great,
Amazon and you can order it.
great.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Ms. Quigley. I will see you in Mauritius, and thank you for everyone who listens. I mean, my hope with these quotes book is that you just find one quote that reflects exactly where you are at the journey. It supports your movement. So the next place you pick up the book again, you'll find another quote that'll help you support
And
you in movement to the next stage. Yeah,
that is certainly what this book does. So thank you so much for our Jeff. I think that might be is it an hour and a half's conversation we've just had?
something, sure, something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
something like that. So thank you. Chat to you soon. Thank you.
thank you.